is a guy. His name is Sam Harris, and he wrote a book years ago called The End of Faith. And he began a new atheist movement. Um, and again, this is one of those things where atheism, like science, becomes a religion of its own and does exactly the kinds of things that uh, that people find religion um, to be, you know, culpable for. It then becomes something that's stifling rather than supportive. I believe atheism can be a great step, a first step, because for what most atheists are reacting to are are pulling away from is a false idea of what spirituality is, and that false idea is often promulgated by religions and very um, rather simplistic and superficial uh, you know expressions of religious faith. Uh, the idea of there being an old guy with a beard in the sky, those kinds of things. Uh, you know, atheists find ridiculous. And in some ways, that is the first step, because when you rid yourself of spurious uh, beliefs or suggestions about what religion and spirituality is, when you're free to throw that away, you're also freeing yourself to actually have spiritual experiences, to actually become spiritual. And for me, getting in touch with that, connecting with that, is the biggest key to emotional and mental health. So this guy Harris, uh, after writing this book and being part of this movement, uh, began to have personal spiritual experiences. Because again, the concept that they're dealing with is a false concept because of a basic misunderstanding of what spirituality is, and that it can be and should be explored on a personal level. So he wrote a new book called Waking Up, in which he writes, I will use spiritual, mystical, contemplative, and transcendent without apology. However, I will be precise in describing the experiences and methods which merit those terms. Spirituality begins, he says, with a reverence for the ordinary that can lead us to insights and experiences that are anything but ordinary. And this is where he talks about self-transcending experiences. That's what spirituality is. That's what we're hardwired to have. But he wouldn't have gotten there if he hadn't gone through his atheism. And yes, is a strain of fundamentalism that's dangerous and anti-scientific, but it's such a small percentage of the people who are involved in either religions or spirituality in its forms. So, and in fact, what we're seeing, research has shown that there's an increasing share of people who don't identify with any major religion. And of course, this term, spiritual but not religious, has become more and more of a thing. And certainly particularly among younger people who are not, affiliating with any religion, it doesn't mean that they are not feeling spiritual. It just means that because of perhaps the reputations of religious institutions, the major ones, in which there's an awful lot of, well, there's awful lot of history. Let's just put it that way. Um, I think it's a very healthy sign that people are, or that there is a growing dissatisfaction with religion. I think it can work in a lot of different ways. I mean, I think that there are people who are within their religious beliefs, but understand that those religious institutions need to be changed in order to fully support people's personal spiritual exploration. And I know when I was when I was in the grip of a mental health crisis, and I was getting treatment, and I was going to therapy, and they were even giving me some medication. None of that was what pulled me out of it. What pulled me out of it was a reconnecting with, how do I put it? With the light within that never goes out. That's the best way that I can describe that. And I got to that. I connected to that through meditation. And I'm fortunate that I'm a person that has an easier time getting to that, has a easier awareness of that than a lot of other people do. For some, it's a lot of hard work. But for me, it comes almost naturally, and has since I've been a kid. But that's what I think is the key to healing, emotional healing, and mental health as well. So last week we talked about the drugs that are often used in managing, mood disorders. These drugs are powerful and shouldn't be used for anything but the more severe forms of mental illness. They really shouldn't be. And unfortunately, they are being, I think, prescribed more often than they should for milder forms of anxiety and depression. There are lots of different approaches that you can take. Medication is not necessarily the go-to place to go. Meditation can often be more effective. Breathing exercises. Breathing is very effective particularly for when you're having or when you're having anxiety attacks and those sorts of things. Having a therapist to talk to can, work well. But some of the other things that you want to think about, and we're going to be talking about, a lot of different approaches. Is this connection? Is this, as Harris was describing it, understanding the sacred in the everyday? Having a perspective on that is something that really does bring the healing. Another difficulty that we can sometimes have is, as we've talked about, how you can have negative thoughts, how you can have a pervasive sense of unhappiness. We talked about optimism versus pessimism. But again, there's no way to eliminate, pessimistic feelings sometimes. And in fact, as it turns out, you don't really need to. In fact, sometimes a fair amount of pessimism, can be healthy and even normal. So there's an article here about this idea of the power of negative thinking. There's a positive power in negative thinking when it's practiced the right way. It's only when it gets out of control and dominates your life that it causes you this, depression and anxiety. But I think negative thinking is probably the wrong term to use. But I for now we'll have to use that term because, for lack of a better one, as they say, it does have a value as an aid to achieving health when you use discernment with it. Positive thinking is certainly important, but to know what not to do, to know what you don't want, can be very instructive. So your subconscious mind has a natural bent for the negative, and it's hardwired to alert you to danger. So to keep you keep you safe. It's more likely to pay attention when something is wrong and to seek out negatives and to remember them than to give them more weight than positives. Negative thinking patterns may also be normal, but they are not healthy. They are habitual, and that's the difference, and are more of a strategy for playing small and staying stuck, instead of a strategy for stepping up and taking responsibility and risks and making things happen. So there's a big difference between the habitual thinking patterns that feed you these negative tapes and don't help you to make your life better, and using the power of negative thinking when facing upcoming situations. So sometimes you have these these tapes, as I've mentioned, where you feel unworthy. You've got a voice inside you that's telling you don't deserve, you're not worthy, good things are for other people, not me, kind of things. Or just that, these things are never going to happen for me. And that's the power of negative thinking gone awry, if you will. But when you hear yourself saying certain things, this wakes you up to the parts of your life that need healing and makes you aware of what you would like to have instead of those. When you accept all your thoughts and emotions, including the negative ones, as allies instead of enemies, that puts you in a position to learn from them and shift them to better feeling and more productive thought. And that's where meditation is, because meditation allows you to have all of those thoughts, everything, rise up. You accept it, you embrace it, and then it moves on. It helps you actually to take energy from those things too. So things you can do are to observe your negative self-talk if you're having a lot of those, and all of the feelings and the emotions that you have. Just jot them down in a notebook, or grab a recorder or something, or just deal with them through meditation. so that you're not trying to change them or censor them.